When we, as the audience or the player of a game, TV show, or movie, are presented with brand new characters that we're only just being introduced to, we often make a subconscious analysis as to who we like and dislike, regardless of the mere seconds of screen time that said characters might have. Maybe it's the way they walk, the things they say, the way they present themselves. Your first impression might even be determined by the way they treat other people. But either way, a rough opinion on a character can be created almost instantly. However, these opinions usually, more often than not, change dramatically. We learn to love characters we didn't care for in the beginning, and hate characters we thought we liked. These opinions obviously change because judgment on a character on first impressions is flimsy. We still have much to learn about their personality, and receiving context behind their character as a whole is what provides us with a solid opinion. Even characters we don't particularly like in the beginning might eventually reveal some sort of redeemable quality. But what happens when a character is so immensely dislikable that our opinion only worsens? What happens when there are absolutely no redeemable qualities for them to lean on? Well, Rockstar showed us what happens in Red Dead Redemption 2. And it comes in the form of a character that everybody loves to hate. And to make things worse, it comes in the form of a character we're forced to spend a little too much time with. So here's why Micah Bell III is by far Rockstar's most hated character. I say Micah Bell III because I want to segue into a little bit of background information that I think is quite important. To fully understand why Micah is Rockstar's most hated character, I've got to take you all back to the year 1860, the year Micah Bell III was born to Micah Bell Jr. Now it comes as no surprise that the man who raised Micah would be just as ruthless and just as evil as his son would eventually become. His father was a petty outlaw involved in violent crime, and from the small amount of information that we have on Micah's past, we can gather that his father involved him in his wrongdoings from a very young age. Skip ahead a little and we're brought to the year 1877. Now, this is a defining year for Micah because at this point, he's on the run with his father, wanted for the brutal murder of two people who were found hanging from their rafters with their throats slit. Now, not much else is known about Micah's past, but it's assumed that he ran with his father for the remainder of his young life, committing a multitude of other crimes along the way. I find this information to be important because, besides including Micah's literal birth, his past also gives context to the man he would become. A career criminal and a hitman, wild and unpredictable, somebody who lives for the action. Micah is presented in a very negative light from his early appearances onwards, and Rockstar ensures that our first impressions of Micah give us a real taste of his personality, and to some extent, his beliefs. We're immediately introduced to a racist, unempathetic, and violent man who assaults another member of the gang because he was offended by a joke. It's also early on that we see Micah harass a distressed woman, who we later learn is Sadie Adler. What I'm trying to say, in short, is that right off the jump, it's pretty safe to say that there isn't a whole lot to like. But as I said before, first impressions aren't something you can often completely rely on. However, as we continue to interact with Micah and become familiar with who he is on a more personal level, it's pretty clear to see that he's just plain unlikable. But what is it that makes him Rockstar's most hated character? What is it that sets him apart from the other Rockstar characters so well known for their betrayals, murders, irritating personalities even? What sets Micah at the top of that list? Well, I think it can be broken down into three main categories. Three main categories that sum up the community's hatred for Micah Bell in particular. Number 1, his chaotic and antagonistic personality. Number 2, his shameless disloyalty to the gang. And finally, number 3, his constant manipulation of Dutch van der Linde. So let's begin with his chaotic and antagonistic personality. We get our first look into just how unnecessarily chaotic Micah can be when Arthur is tasked with breaking him out of jail. Obviously, the whole operation does not go smoothly, and Micah isn't completely to blame for the shootout against the law that ensues, as that was mostly inevitable. But it's what he decides to do in the midst of their getaway that's the problem. Micah stops off at a house while they're escaping and decides to murder everyone inside to retrieve his pistols. And although we don't see everything from the outside, it's safe for us to assume that the murders probably weren't necessary, especially not in the heat of a getaway in which Micah places Arthur in a position where shooting their way through the town is the only way to escape. And this right here is the large issue when it comes to Micah's personality. He's not concerned at all with the safety or security of others, regardless of how they help him or what they're supposed to mean to him. He's as unempathetic as they come, and if it's beneficial for Micah, that's all that matters. Not only does he view his relationships as disposable, but the betterment of anything that doesn't directly benefit him is either ignored or manipulated to do so. These narcissistic traits of Micah's become more and more prevalent as the game goes on, and there are countless examples of his antagonistic behavior that range from simply annoying to heinous. Annoyance in the form of initiating arguments in the camp, name-calling, generally getting under the skin of his fellow gang members, and heinous in the form of unnecessarily evil actions, such as killing Jack's dog Kane for no apparent reason. There are a lot of things on a larger scale that explain the hatred for Micah, but I also think that his drive to be needlessly despicable on a lesser mentioned scale adds a lot to the disliking of his character. His destructive and malicious nature is present throughout the entire game, and seeing his abhorrent treatment of the people around him, most of which who were completely undeserving, was enough for me already to dislike him more than I had any other Rockstar character for a long time. But as I mentioned briefly before, there are three main reasons that I think Micah is so universally disliked. The second being his shameless betrayal of the gang.
We offered you a deal, Mr. Morgan. You should have taken it.
I'm a fool, Mr. Milton.
Not all you boys have quite so many scruples. Old Micah Bell?
Micah? You mean Molly?
Molly O'Shea? Sweated her a couple of times, never talked a word, had to let her go. Micah Bell. We picked him up when you boys came back from the Caribbean, and he's been a good boy ever since.
Micah's character isn't wildly in depth, and there isn't a whole lot of complexity to his personality in general. He isn't striving to become a better person, he isn't at war with his own morality, he isn't doing bad things for a perceived good reason. He is what I described in a previous video of mine as a bottomless evil. There's nothing to suggest that Micah would do anything out of compassion or out of sympathy or simply because he cared about someone. So it makes perfect sense that betraying the gang to his benefit wouldn't take a second thought. Rockstar makes sure we understand early on that the gang you're providing for as Arthur is family. The beginning chapters of Red Dead 2 in particular show us a family of outlaws that eat together, sleep together, fail together, and succeed together. It's how Rockstar makes us feel so connected to the characters we spend majority of the game with. So it comes as no surprise that a major element of our hatred towards Micah, both as Arthur and as the player, stems from his desire to tear the gang apart. Micah never truly viewed the gang as family, but he didn't mind pretending to when it was to his benefit. His shameless disloyalty to the gang became more obvious in the later stages of the game, particularly in Beaver Hollow, but his manipulation of Dutch Van der Linde, which I'll cover more thoroughly later in the video, allowed him to turn those who trusted Dutch on anyone attempting to expose his betrayals, therefore allowing him to maintain the illusion that he was being loyal to the gang, at least from the perspective of some. A majority of the gang's downfall was influenced by Micah, and he provided the finishing blow to any of the gang's trust and unity by selling them out to the Pinkertons. Such an act is not only completely unforgivable by the character's standards, but we as the player feel so deeply betrayed once we're given solid confirmation that Micah was the rat all along. His decision to betray everyone in such a way was the catalyst for a number of deaths and tragedies that destabilized the gang, and to see Micah slowly get away with it in the later stages of Chapter 6 only fuels our loathing for him even more. But somehow, Micah's betrayal of the gang through the Pinkertons was not his worst attempt at breaking the gang down. No, he discovered early on that he could get his way from the inside, by capitalizing on both Dutch Van der Linde's position of power and unstable egocentric personality.
This better not be no stupid revenge mission, Dutch. It ain't worth it.
Don't be ridiculous.
Oh, Arthur, it's just a simple social call.
I just recently made a video that breaks down Dutch van der Linde's personality and role in the downfall of the gang, and one character that made a recurring appearance in that video was none other than Micah Bell. Without restating too many of the points I already made in that video, it's important to note just how significant Micah's role is in what we could consider as Dutch's fall from grace. When Dutch began to crumble under the pressure, Micah saw this as the perfect opportunity to manipulate him. The perfect opportunity to gain Dutch's unconditional trust by feeding his ego and supporting even the worst of plans. Micah knew that he could secure Dutch as an ally as long as he capitalized on Dutch's growing vulnerability. He knew that he could not only get away with ratting out and destroying the gang, but he could also get away with pinning the failure of Dutch's plans on Arthur. Micah developed a growing hatred for Arthur because it was he who saw through his lies and threatened to compromise his true intentions. And it angered us as the player to witness him string Dutch along to the point of betraying Arthur. He used Dutch as a chess piece to not only thin out the gang for his own gain, but also to ensure that Arthur was out of the way. Micah's manipulative influence on Dutch displays just how little he cares for anybody but himself. Dutch provided him with not only a gang to run with, but a family to live amongst. He provided him with a level of trust that others knew to withhold, and he disregarded that trust through betrayal and manipulation. Micah swindled Dutch all the way up until his demise, using his final moments to once again attempt to turn Dutch on someone he once considered family. And regardless of what Dutch's true intentions were at the end of the game, there was no moment more satisfying than seeing the real rat of the gang get what he deserved.
You shot me pretty good.
Micah Bell is hated so widely because there never seems to be a limit to his evil. He is driven by causing chaos and destruction, and uses the problems he causes for others to his advantage whenever possible. Watching him leech off the gang and off of Dutch's blind trust is more than enough to make us dislike him, but it's his decision to rip the gang apart through multiple betrayals and countless manipulations that really displays his purely malevolent nature. The difference between Micah and many other characters that we just can't stand is the fact that there are zero things we can redeem him by. He never makes an attempt to change his ways, he never even shows a hint of remorse for his actions, and it doesn't even appear as though he's doing the horrible things that he does to accomplish a goal. Whenever he commits an evil act, we can't help but think that it was purely for the sake of it. So when we're presented with a character that not only ruins lives, but also capitalizes on the misfortune that he causes, it makes total sense that the community is going to hate his guts.